Right, so Keir Starmer has caused so much anger within his party now that matters have escalated to calls for him to resign. He has for weeks now staunchly stood by Israel's right to defend itself, or defend herself as he likes to put it, the lobbyists' line that is. Backed Israel in committing war crimes before denying he ever said that he did. Never apologised for that. He tried to make things better by going to a Muslim centre and telling them to hand over the hostages. But not all Muslims are Hamas, especially ones in South Wales, or even Palestinians for that matter, and he caused more anger over his politicisation of that event. The centre having no clue this is what he'd later say, that this is what he had planned. He never apologised for that either. He then went to Trevor Chinn funded Chatham House. The pro-Israel Blairite Labour donor Trevor Chinn, Starmer himself of course, is Trevor Chinn funded. Chinn funds all manner of other pro-Israel Labour politicians and institutions, and is a chair of the Jewish Leadership Council. At Chatham House, Starmer went on to give a speech, again reinforcing Israel's right to do what it is doing, refused to be drawn on whether they are committing war crimes or not, though of course had no problems not so long ago accusing Vladimir Putin on live TV of being a war criminal. 20 times as many civilians have been killed in 3 weeks in Gaza as have been killed in the entire Russia-Ukraine conflict, so little wonder the calls for him to go have increased to the point we're now at. And still he won't budge. Right, so if Keir Starmer was hoping his ongoing interventions were going to calm things down and he'd get away with his pro-Israeli anti-ceasefire, his let's give Gaza aid as long as Israel can still target it attitude, then he's been very much mistaken. As if anything, things have continued to escalate. At least 36 Labour councillors have now quit the Labour Party, and the more Starmer seems to come out and say on the matter, the worse he seems to make things for himself. And that's no surprise, really, when his narrative has never changed. He is still staunchly standing by Israel, against Hamas. Of course, we're all against Hamas, but Israel is an aggressor too, and oh dear, never mind all those Palestinian civilians that are getting caught up in the crossfire. He will not call for a ceasefire to help them. He seems to think we will believe him if he tells us everyone is downing their tools will lead to even more violence. He takes us for fools. A poll of Labour councillors yesterday showed that some 43% of them are dissatisfied with the party position on Israel and Palestine, with some 37% of them satisfied with it. That's especially notable when you consider that Starmer has been purging the left from the party for years, and party representation, much like its membership, has become gradually more skewed to the right over time. So it's not like this is an obvious indicator of left-wing disgust. This is across the party left to right, in a party that has become, overall, more right-wing. Let's not forget who he's being advised in all of this by, though, of course. Peter Mandelson, the Prince of Darkness, resurrected from his Blairite crypt, where D. Ream's Things Can Only Get Better plays on a loop, and a poster of Blair with his biggest rictus grin just where he lays his head, right next to another picture of Jeffrey Epstein, I expect. Starmer dusted off this relic of the 1990s where he should have been left, and if you wanted an idea of the sort of advice he might be giving to Starmer right now, the wrong advice, the 30 years out of date advice, when he was on Robert Peston's show this week, and he said of Starmer on that show, I think what he is doing is demonstrating to the British people the sort of toughness and mettle that he would display if he were to become Prime Minister of this country. He has been very tough, very realistic about facing up to the implications, the consequences of what Hamas has done, and in doing so he's absolutely demonstrated that he is determined to break with Jeremy Corbyn on national security issues. He did it before Ukraine, he's now done it again on Hamas. Guess who's still living rent-free in Mandy's head? He literally spat the man's name out. He couldn't resist but shoehorn Corbyn into the conversation, a man who he said during his leadership that he worked every day to bring down. Mandelson, the man who preferred the Tories to a socialist-led Labour Party, who is now advising the current Labour leader. Is it any wonder Starmer is seen with such disgust now? What Starmer is doing right now is being tough, like he was over Ukraine. Well, his tough looks an awful lot like turning a blind eye to genocide to me. And since you mentioned Ukraine, the hypocrisy of that situation is writ large, when he had no issue calling Putin a war criminal in his attacks on Ukraine before there was any evidence available for him to draw on, but he cannot say the same of Israel, despite 20 times more innocent Gazan civilians having been killed in the last several weeks there than Ukrainians have been since the war began between Ukraine and Russia more than a year and a half ago. Mandelson epitomises the leadership of the Labour Party right now, but the fact they are losing huge numbers of voters right now, especially Muslim ones, are losing members, are losing councillors, and none of it apparently deterring them, because the polling numbers over the Tories show they're on the road to power, regardless of them having shown their true colours, regardless of these people that are walking away from the party in disgust. Where standing his ground and proving his toughness and mettle might be Mandelson's way, might be Mandelson's thinking as Starmer, his view, all it is doing amongst the wider Labour Party is escalating matters. The entire Labour group of Sheffield City Council joined a Green Party motion calling for an immediate ceasefire. In Blackburn, where 9 councillors have quit Labour, they've actually got as far as to form a whole new party. This actually followed a meeting with Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner and was triggered because she wouldn't back a ceasefire either. Further to that, there is now talk of national coordination to challenge Labour in at least a dozen of their seats. This is the sort of action no poll is able to reflect. And the latest and not insignificant move, something I can see having a real ripple effect to other parts of the country, is now a direct call for Starmer's resignation, made all the more emphatic because it is a joint letter, a joint call for his resignation from the council leaders of 2 Labour-run councils. Councillors Afrasiab Anwar, I guarantee I've said that wrong, and Asjad Mahmood of Burnley Borough Council and Pendle Borough Council respectively, issued a press release relating to this, saying, "Councillors call on Keir Starmer to step down. Leaders of Burnley and Pendle Labour groups have called up Labour leader Keir Starmer to consider his position as leader of the party and step down to allow a leadership election. The call on behalf of Labour councillors in their respective areas follows hundreds of Labour councillors and MPs calling on the leader to put pressure on the government to call for a ceasefire to prevent any further loss of innocent lives in Gaza." Councillor Anwar said, "I and colleagues across Burnley over the last few weeks have seen the sad loss of people, including young children in Palestine and Israel, and this has to stop immediately. I joined the Labour Party because of the values of standing up and speaking out against injustices across the world. Sadly, Keir Starmer has not stood up for Labour values, hence why we are calling upon him to step down. Blindly following the position of Rishi Sunak is not acceptable to us and our residents who we represent." Councillor Asjad Mahmood added, "I and my fellow Labour colleagues have seen the distressing loss of lives on both sides of this conflict and have been putting pressure on the party leader to lead calls for a ceasefire to stop the innocent loss of lives. Unfortunately, he has failed to listen, and we ask he consider his position and resign to allow someone to lead our party who has compassion and speaks out against injustice and indiscriminate killings on innocent human beings." They're not mincing their words. They've definitely had enough, and haven't we all? Both main party leaders are devoid of compassion completely here. Israeli weapons being used to bomb out Gaza, targeting civilians indiscriminately, which is a war crime. Weapons too often we're supplying. Obviously, and you have Sunak telling Netanyahu he hopes he wins. And you have Starmer saying Israel can cut off water and power, followed by incessant denials of that, when we all heard him say it. The very latest rumour, and it is only a rumour at this stage, is that a leadership challenge is actually brewing now, though unfortunately it is also alleged that the challenger is coming from another right-winger. That does, however, spell out the damage Starmer is doing to the party right now, that a member of his own end of the Labour Party has decided he's too much of a liability now and has to go. Who it is, I don't know. Who do you think it might be? You can have a guess. According to a Morning Star article out today, though, 2/5 of the current cabinet, where a challenge is likely to, or most likely to be coming from, have benefited from funding by pro-Israeli groups. 40% of them. So if this is true and a challenge does come, that's a lot of prominent MPs who might make life difficult for any next potential leader, regardless of whether they be left or right, if they take too much of an anti-Israel stance for their liking, regardless of the mood and feelings of the greater movement. Labour MPs are in a bubble over this. I do think, however, that if this challenge does come, no matter who it is, they do have a real chance of taking Starmer out, because if there's got to be any challenge to the ongoing pro-Israel leanings of our politicians and what the Tories are doing, he has to be challenged. And with the considerable upset within the party his stubborn idiocy is causing, I do think he's got to go. I think the mood is there for him now to see him toppled by someone. So who's it going to be? Is it true? We'll have to wait and see. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Keir Starmer has cynically attempted to weaponise Islamophobia Awareness Month, for his own ends, now as well, of course, only making matters worse for himself again, showing beyond doubt he's not going to change. He's just going to keep trying to take us all for fools. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.